There is something that happens to a lot of people over 65 in the summer months that they do not expect. They are eating more fruit than they have all year. The season is generous. Stone fruits, melons, tropical varieties, sweet berries in every direction. They are eating well, drinking more water, spending time outdoors. And yet the stiffness in their knees when they get up from a chair is no better. The ache in their fingers in the morning has not eased. The hips that were manageable through the winter feel just as difficult. Most people in that situation assume the problem is the heat, or the humidity, or simply the nature of their arthritis. They do not consider the bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter as a variable. But there is a layer of nutritional biochemistry that connects specific fruits, some of the most commonly eaten summer fruits, to the inflammatory pathways that drive joint pain. And it runs in both directions. Certain fruits consumed regularly in summer can quietly worsen the inflammatory environment in joint tissue. Others contain specific compounds that reduce inflammation at the molecular level, modulate uric acid, and protect cartilage from the oxidative damage that accelerates its breakdown. I am Dr. Naira Stein. Today I want to give you a complete, specific, and practically useful guide to both sides of this picture: the summer fruits that are working against your joints without your knowledge, and the ones that are actively doing something to protect them. I will explain the mechanisms, not just the conclusions, because understanding the why is what makes this information genuinely useful, rather than simply another list to follow and forget. Stay through the entire conversation. The section on worst fruits contains information that will surprise most people, including several fruits with excellent general health reputations, whose specific effects on joint inflammation and uric acid are almost never discussed in mainstream nutrition advice. And the section on best fruits includes preparation and timing guidance that determines whether the benefit reaches the joint tissue or is lost before it gets there. What is actually happening in inflamed joints after 65? To understand why food matters for joint pain, you need a working picture of what inflammation in joint tissue actually involves, because the connection between what you eat and what you feel in your knees or fingers is not metaphorical. It is chemical and direct. Joints are enclosed spaces. The bones that meet at a joint are covered by cartilage, a firm, smooth tissue that absorbs impact and allows bones to move against each other without friction. The joint is surrounded by a capsule lined with synovial membrane, which produces the synovial fluid that lubricates the joint and delivers nutrients to the cartilage. Cartilage itself has no blood supply. It depends entirely on the synovial fluid for its nutrition and its waste removal. In a healthy joint, this system is self-maintaining. Cartilage is nourished, waste products are cleared. The synovial membrane remains thin and unremarkable. In an inflamed joint, whether the inflammation arises from osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, gout, or the more general age-related inflammatory changes that affect most people over 65 to some degree, this system is disrupted. The synovial membrane thickens and becomes hyperactive, producing excess inflammatory cytokines, signaling proteins including interleukin-1, interleukin-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These cytokines drive the destruction of cartilage by activating enzymes that break down its structural proteins. They also sensitize the nerve endings surrounding the joint, which is why inflamed joints hurt even at rest. The reason diet matters in this picture is specific. Several of the most important inflammatory cytokines involved in joint destruction are regulated, upward or downward, by dietary compounds that are consumed every day. Certain sugars drive cytokine production. Certain antioxidants suppress it. Certain purines elevate uric acid, which deposits as needle-shaped crystals in joint spaces and triggers a separate but equally damaging inflammatory cascade. And certain polyphenols directly inhibit the enzymes that break down cartilage collagen. The food you eat does not change the underlying diagnosis, but it can meaningfully shift the inflammatory environment in which the joint is operating, either feeding the inflammation that is already present or reducing it. Summer fruit, consumed in the quantities most people eat it in the warmer months, is one of the more significant dietary variables in this shift, and it cuts both ways. The first is fructose, specifically high hepatic fructose loads, the kind that arrive when large amounts of high fructose fruits are eaten frequently and without moderating context. When the liver processes fructose in excess of its glycogen storage capacity, the metabolic byproducts include uric acid. Uric acid at elevated blood concentrations crystallizes in joint spaces, a mechanism most associated with gout, but relevant to a broader population of older adults than the gout diagnosis implies. Research has found that high fructose intake is independently associated with elevated uric acid in adults without a formal gout diagnosis, and that elevated uric acid contributes to joint inflammation and cartilage degradation beyond the specific gouty arthritis context. The second is advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. These are compounds formed when sugars bond to proteins or fats during certain processing and cooking methods. Dietary AGEs from processed foods are a primary source, but high-sugar fruits eaten in large quantities also contribute to the blood sugar fluctuations that drive endogenous age formation, the production of these compounds inside the body. AGEs accumulate in cartilage tissue, where they cross-link collagen fibers, making cartilage stiffer, more brittle, and more vulnerable to mechanical damage. They also activate inflammatory receptors on the synovial membrane, amplifying the cytokine cascade. The connection between AGE accumulation in cartilage and the rate of osteoarthritis progression is one of the more consistently documented findings in joint biology research. These two mechanisms, fructose-driven uric acid elevation and blood sugar-driven AGE formation, are the primary pathways through which the wrong summer fruits worsen joint inflammation. Keep them in mind as we go through the specific fruits. Worst fruit 1, watermelon, the deceptive health symbol of summer. Watermelon is the quintessential summer fruit. It is hydrating, it is refreshing, it feels light and harmless. For most general health purposes, a modest slice is a perfectly reasonable dietary choice. The problem for older adults with joint concerns arises from two factors: the fruit's position on the glycemic index and the quantity in which most people eat it during summer. Watermelon has one of the highest glycemic indices of any commonly consumed whole fruit, sitting between 72 and 80 depending on ripeness, which places it in the same range as white bread. The glycemic index measures how rapidly a food raises blood glucose relative to pure glucose. A high glycemic index means a fast, sharp rise in blood sugar. Now, watermelon has a relatively low glycemic load per standard serving because its water content is so high. A modest 120-gram slice produces a smaller absolute glucose rise than its glycemic index would suggest. This is the argument used to reassure people that watermelon is fine in reasonable portions. The complication is that nobody eats 120 grams of watermelon at a summer gathering. A typical serving is 3 to 4 times that, a generous wedge or a large bowl of cubed pieces. At that quantity, the glycemic load becomes meaningful, and the blood sugar spike that follows is real. Repeated blood sugar spikes over days and weeks of summer eating drive endogenous AGE formation and sustain the low-grade inflammatory environment in joint tissue that older adults are trying to manage. Watermelon also contains fructose, not in extreme concentration, but in proportion to the large volumes in which it is consumed. 3 cups of watermelon, a modest summer serving for many people, delivers approximately 17 grams of fructose, enough to meaningfully contribute to the daily fructose load in someone whose liver is already processing fructose from other sources throughout the day. For those managing joint pain, watermelon is best treated as an occasional summer pleasure rather than a daily staple, eaten in genuinely small quantities alongside protein or healthy fat that moderates the blood sugar rise. Worst fruit 2, ripe mango, high fructose, high glycemic, high joint impact. Mango is one of the most beloved fruits in the world and one of the most nutritionally impressive, with a micronutrient profile that includes beta-carotene, vitamin C, and a range of phytochemicals. In the context of general health, a small portion of mango is a reasonable dietary choice for most people. For older adults with joint pain, particularly those managing any degree of gout or elevated uric acid, mango, consumed in typical summer portions, is one of the most consistently problematic dietary choices available. A medium mango contains approximately 45 grams of total sugar, with a fructose component approaching 23 grams. The glycemic index of ripe mango is moderate to high, 51 to 56, and when a whole mango is eaten in one sitting, the combined fructose and glucose load is substantial. The fructose specifically drives uric acid production through the hepatic pathway described earlier. Research examining dietary fructose intake and serum uric acid levels has found a clear dose-response relationship. The more fructose consumed, the higher uric acid climbs, and the effect is measurable within hours of a high fructose meal. For older adults who experience joint flares, periods of intensified pain and stiffness, tracking whether those flares correlate with days of generous mango consumption is a worthwhile personal experiment. The connection, when it exists, is typically visible within 24 to 48 hours. The ripeness dimension matters here too. An underripe mango has a lower fructose content and a lower glycemic index than a fully ripe, deeply sweet one. If mango is a fruit you love and are unwilling to eliminate entirely, choosing slightly underripe fruit and limiting to a quarter to a half cup alongside a meal, not as a standalone snack, substantially moderates its joint impact. Worst fruit 3. Grapes. Small, sweet, and easy to overeat. Grapes carry a cardiovascular health reputation, built on their resveratrol and anthocyanin content, compounds that have documented anti-inflammatory properties and that contribute genuine benefits when consumed in appropriate quantities. This reputation is part of what makes grapes a problematic entry on a worst fruits list, and it requires a careful clarification. The polyphenol benefit of grapes is real. It is also modest in the quantities found in whole grapes, and it does not outweigh the joint impact of the quantities in which grapes are typically eaten by someone for whom they are a primary summer snack. Grapes are small, require no preparation, have a natural stopping point that most people simply do not observe, and are sweet enough to eat continuously without the conscious decision to have another. A cup of grapes contains approximately 23 grams of sugar and 8 grams of fructose. Most people who sit with a bowl of grapes during a summer afternoon eat 2 to 3 cups, delivering 16 to 24 grams of fructose in a sitting, equivalent in hepatic fructose load to a large glass of commercial fruit juice. The specific joint concern with grapes, beyond general fructose load, is their contribution to uric acid in people with any predisposition toward elevated levels. Studies examining food patterns and gout flare frequency have identified grapes and grape products, including raisins, which concentrate the sugar of whole grapes, as foods associated with elevated uric acid in susceptible individuals. For someone managing joint pain without elevated uric acid, a modest portion of red or purple grapes, a small handful, not a bowl, delivers their polyphenol benefit without a problematic fructose load. For anyone with a history of gout, elevated uric acid on blood tests, or regular joint flares without clear cause, grapes deserve a significant reduction in daily intake through the summer months. Worst fruit 4. Pineapple. The inflammation paradox. Pineapple presents one of the most genuinely confusing pictures in joint nutrition because it contains a compound with well-documented anti-inflammatory properties, bromelain, a proteolytic enzyme found primarily in the core and stem of the fruit, alongside a sugar profile that drives inflammatory processes in the joint tissue that bromelain is supposed to reduce. Bromelain has been studied for its effects on inflammation and has shown genuine benefit in clinical research on post-surgical swelling and musculoskeletal inflammation. It inhibits certain pro-inflammatory cytokines and has a modest but measurable effect on reducing soft tissue swelling. This is the basis for the widespread advice that pineapple is good for joint pain and arthritis. The practical complication is twofold. First, the majority of bromelain in pineapple is concentrated in the core, the tough, fibrous central section that most people cut away and discard. The sweet, edible flesh of the pineapple contains considerably less bromelain than the supplement literature would suggest. Second, the flesh of a ripe pineapple contains approximately 16 grams of sugar per cup, with a meaningful fructose fraction and a glycemic index of approximately 59. A standard summer serving, 2 to 3 cups of pineapple chunks, delivers a hepatic fructose load that drives uric acid production and blood sugar fluctuation, working directly against the anti-inflammatory effect that makes pineapple seem beneficial in the first place. The net effect for most older adults eating pineapple in ordinary summer quantities is a small anti-inflammatory input from bromelain in the flesh, substantially outweighed by a pro-inflammatory input from the sugar load. It is, in the context of joint management, a self-defeating food when eaten freely. If bromelain is a specific therapeutic goal, supplemental bromelain in standardized doses delivers the active compound at concentrations that whole pineapple flesh simply cannot match, without the accompanying sugar. Pineapple as an occasional small addition to a mixed fruit bowl is reasonable. Pineapple as a regular anti-arthritis food in generous summer portions is nutritionally counterproductive. Worst fruit 5. Cherries. A critical distinction. This entry requires careful framing because cherries appear on virtually every list of beneficial foods for joint pain and gout, and that recommendation is supported by genuine research. The distinction that is almost never made in popular nutrition communication is the one between tart cherries and sweet cherries. Tart cherries, Montmorency variety specifically, have a documented and well-replicated anti-inflammatory profile. Their anthocyanin concentration is among the highest of any commonly available fruit. Clinical research has found that tart cherry consumption reduces serum uric acid, lowers markers of inflammation, and is associated with reduced frequency of gout flares. The research on tart cherries and joint health is one of the more robustly supported findings in this area of nutrition science. Sweet cherries, the Bing and Rainier varieties that fill supermarket shelves through summer, have a different nutritional profile. Their anthocyanin content is lower, their sugar content is higher, and they are eaten in volumes, a bag consumed across an afternoon, that deliver a fructose load sufficient to elevate uric acid in susceptible individuals. Several case studies and observational reports have documented gout flares specifically associated with large summer sweet cherry consumption in people who believed they were eating a therapeutic food. The practical summary is this. Tart cherries, consumed as whole fresh fruit, frozen, or as unsweetened tart cherry juice, are genuinely beneficial for joint inflammation and uric acid management after 65. Sweet cherries, eaten in the modest portions appropriate to their sugar content, a small handful, not a bag, are a reasonable summer pleasure. Sweet cherries eaten freely throughout the day as a joint health food are a misapplication of research that was conducted on an entirely different variety. The best summer fruits for joint pain relief after 65 best fruit. 1. Tart cherries, the most directly evidence-supported joint food. Tart cherries lead this section because the research supporting their specific benefit for joint inflammation and uric acid management is more directly clinical and more specifically relevant to the mechanisms of joint pain than the research behind any other fruit on this list. The active compounds responsible for tart cherries' joint benefits are primarily anthocyanins, particularly cyanidin-3-glucoside and cyanidin-3-rutinoside, along with quercetin, a flavonoid with potent anti-inflammatory properties. Together, these compounds inhibit cyclooxygenase enzymes COX-1 and COX-2, the same enzymatic pathway targeted by nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen and naproxen, through a natural, lower-potency mechanism that carries none of the gastrointestinal or cardiovascular risks associated with long-term NSAID use. A landmark study published in the journal Arthritis and Rheumatism followed patients with gout and found that those who consumed tart cherries over a 2-day period had a 35% lower risk of gout attack compared to those who consumed no cherries. The risk reduction was even greater, 75%, in those who combined tart cherry consumption with allopurinol, the standard uric acid lowering medication, suggesting that tart cherries work synergistically with pharmaceutical management, rather than simply replacing it. For broader joint inflammation beyond gout, research on tart cherry juice consumption in older adults with osteoarthritis found significant reductions in inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 after 6 weeks of daily consumption. The practical recommendation is 1 cup of fresh or frozen tart cherries daily, or 240 milliliters of unsweetened tart cherry juice taken in the morning. Frozen tart cherries retain their anthocyanin content effectively and are often more accessible than fresh during the non-peak summer season. The juice form delivers the active compounds in a more concentrated format, but should be unsweetened. Commercial cherry juice with added sugar partially defeats its anti-inflammatory purpose. Best fruit 2, blueberries, broad-spectrum anti-inflammatory action. Blueberries have one of the most extensively studied anti-inflammatory profiles of any commonly available fruit, and their specific relevance to joint health after 65 is grounded in multiple documented mechanisms, rather than a single active compound. Their primary anti-inflammatory compounds are anthocyanins, the same class responsible for tart cherries benefits, along with pterostilbene, a natural analog of resveratrol with superior bioavailability, and a range of phenolic acids that collectively suppress the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, including TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6, the same cytokines that drive cartilage destruction in arthritic joints. Blueberries also provide meaningful amounts of vitamin C, approximately 14 milligrams per 100 grams, which is a direct cofactor in collagen synthesis. Collagen is the primary structural protein of cartilage. Without adequate vitamin C, the body cannot synthesize or repair collagen effectively. In older adults, who are often in a state of mild vitamin C insufficiency due to reduced absorption efficiency, regular blueberry consumption contributes to the nutritional substrate the body needs to maintain, rather than simply lose cartilage. The fructose content of blueberries is low relative to most summer fruits, approximately 3.5 grams per cup, making them one of the most metabolically safe fruit choices for older adults managing joint inflammation who are also concerned about uric acid or blood sugar. 1 cup of fresh or frozen blueberries daily is the research-supported target for measurable anti-inflammatory benefit. Frozen blueberries retain their anthocyanin content at equivalent or in some studies superior levels to fresh, because the freezing process ruptures cell walls and makes the compounds more bioavailable. Eat them at room temperature rather than straight from frozen to take full advantage of this. Best fruit 3. Strawberries. Vitamin C density and inflammation suppression. Strawberries are one of summer's most abundant and affordable fruits, and their specific value for joint health after 65 is underpinned by a vitamin C content that is among the highest of any commonly eaten whole fruit, approximately 89 milligrams per 100 grams, exceeding the vitamin C content of oranges on a per gram basis. The relevance of vitamin C for joint health is specific and worth explaining clearly. Vitamin C does 3 distinct things in joint tissue. It is a required cofactor for prolyl hydroxylase and lysyl hydroxylase, the enzymes that stabilize collagen's triple helix structure. Without it, collagen produced in cartilage is structurally weak and degrades more rapidly under mechanical load. Second, vitamin C is a potent, water-soluble antioxidant that neutralizes the reactive oxygen species produced during the inflammatory process in joint tissue, the same oxidative stress that drives the AGE accumulation and collagen cross-linking described earlier. Third, and more recently documented, vitamin C has been found to reduce serum uric acid through a mechanism involving increased renal excretion. The kidneys excrete more uric acid when vitamin C is adequate, reducing the serum pool available for crystallization in joint spaces. A study published in Arthritis and Rheumatism found that each 500 milligram increment in daily vitamin C intake was associated with a 17% reduction in gout risk, an effect size comparable to modest pharmaceutical intervention. Strawberries also contain fisetin, a flavonoid with specific documented effects on senescent cell accumulation in joint tissue. Senescent cells, damaged cells that have stopped dividing but refuse to die, accumulate in joint tissue with age and produce a continuous, low-grade inflammatory output called the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. Research identifying fisetin as a potential senostatic compound, one that reduces the accumulation and activity of these cells, is preliminary but consistently interesting, and strawberries are one of the richest natural food sources of fisetin available. 1 cup of fresh strawberries 4 to 5 times per week delivers meaningful vitamin C, fisetin, and antioxidant support to the joint environment without a problematic sugar load, approximately 7 grams of fructose per cup, well within a manageable range. Best fruit 4. Watermelon seeds and rind, the parts nobody eats. This entry requires a clarification before it becomes useful. The watermelon flesh appeared in the worst fruit section, and that assessment stands. What belongs in the best fruit section is the part of the watermelon that most people throw away. Watermelon rind, the white layer between the green outer skin and the red flesh, contains a meaningful concentration of citrulline, an amino acid that the body converts to arginine. Arginine is the direct precursor of nitric oxide, the signaling molecule that dilates blood vessels and improves circulation. Better peripheral circulation improves the delivery of nutrients and oxygen to joint tissue and improves the removal of inflammatory waste products from the synovial space. Research on citrulline supplementation and inflammatory markers has found reductions in muscle soreness and inflammation that have reasonable mechanistic applicability to joint tissue. Watermelon rind also contains chlorophyll and is low in fructose relative to the flesh. It is considerably less sweet because its sugar content is far lower. It can be eaten raw, lightly pickled, or blended into a smoothie, where its mild flavor is easily masked. Watermelon seeds, when eaten rather than spitted out, provide magnesium, approximately 21 milligrams per 28-gram serving, which is involved in more than 300 enzymatic processes, including several directly relevant to inflammation regulation. Magnesium deficiency is common in adults over 65 and is independently associated with elevated inflammatory markers. The seeds are most easily consumed when sprouted and dried, available as a snack food or ground and added to smoothies. The practical point is unconventional but genuine. The most joint beneficial parts of a watermelon are the parts most people discard. Eat less of the sweet red flesh and more of the white rind. Best fruit 5. Avocado, the fruit that protects cartilage directly. Avocado appeared in an earlier conversation in this series for its cardiovascular benefits, and it belongs in this conversation too, because among all the fruits discussed today, avocado is the one with the most directly documented effect on cartilage protection, rather than simply on peripheral inflammation. Avocado contains a class of compounds called avocado soybean unsaponifiables, ASUs, that have been the subject of clinical research specifically on osteoarthritis. Multiple randomized controlled trials have found that ASU supplementation reduces pain and improves function in knee and hip osteoarthritis, inhibits the inflammatory cytokines that drive cartilage degradation, and may slow the progression of cartilage loss over time. Whole avocado provides ASUs in their natural food matrix alongside oleic acid, glutathione, and beta-cytosterol, the full complement of compounds that produce the joint and cardiovascular benefits simultaneously. Avocado contains negligible fructose, has a near-zero glycemic impact, and does not contribute to uric acid elevation under any normal dietary conditions. It is a fruit that offers active joint benefit without a single caveat related to sugar, inflammation, or uric acid. Half a ripe avocado eaten 4 to 5 times per week, in a salad alongside eggs, spread on whole grain bread, or simply eaten with lemon and a pinch of salt, is one of the most comprehensively joint beneficial summer additions available. Its monounsaturated fat content also improves the absorption of the fat-soluble anti-inflammatory compounds present in the other fruits on this list, making it an ideal dietary companion to berries, tart cherries, and strawberries. Best fruit 6. Papaya, bromeline's better balanced cousin. Papaya offers what pineapple promises but fails to deliver in its edible flesh: a meaningful anti-inflammatory enzyme alongside a more moderate sugar profile. Papaya contains papain, a proteolytic enzyme with documented anti-inflammatory properties that reduce soft tissue swelling and pain. Unlike bromelain in pineapple, papain is distributed more evenly throughout the papaya flesh and is present in meaningful concentrations in the edible portions of ripe fruit. It inhibits the same pro-inflammatory cytokines as bromelain and has been studied specifically in the context of musculoskeletal inflammation. Papaya also provides one of the most concentrated dietary sources of vitamin C of any commonly available tropical fruit, approximately 61 milligrams per 100 grams, along with beta-cryptoxanthin, a carotenoid that has been found in epidemiological research to be associated with reduced risk of inflammatory arthritis. A large prospective study found that high dietary intake of beta-cryptoxanthin was associated with a significantly lower risk of developing inflammatory polyarthritis, with an effect size that held after adjustment for other dietary variables. The sugar profile of papaya is more moderate than mango or pineapple, approximately 8 grams of fructose per cup, making it a more metabolically manageable tropical fruit option for older adults concerned about uric acid. Half a cup of fresh papaya 3 to 4 times per week, ideally at room temperature to preserve enzyme activity, is a practical and beneficial addition to a joint-supportive summer diet. The goal here is not to eliminate summer fruit. It is to rebuild the fruit bowl around the varieties that work with the joint's inflammatory biology rather than against it, while preserving the pleasure and variety that make summer eating genuinely enjoyable. The framework is simple. For every high fructose, high glycemic fruit that currently occupies a regular place in your summer eating, identify the substitute from the best fruits list that most closely matches the eating occasion. Instead of a bowl of sweet grapes as an afternoon snack, a cup of blueberries and a small handful of strawberries, lower fructose, higher polyphenol density, equivalent snacking satisfaction. Instead of generous watermelon at summer gatherings, a smaller piece of watermelon flesh alongside a portion of fruit that includes tart cherries or berries. Preserve the seasonal experience while reducing the glycemic load. Instead of mango as a daily summer fruit, fresh papaya or a tart cherry and blueberry mix. More anti-inflammatory compounds, less uric acid pressure. Instead of pineapple chunks as a go-to, strawberries with avocado in a simple summer salad. Vitamin C, cartilage protection, and enzyme support from a more balanced source. Eat fruit with or after a meal that contains protein and healthy fat. Protein and fat slow gastric emptying and moderate the rate at which fruit sugars enter the bloodstream. Eating fruit on an empty stomach as a standalone snack produces a faster, higher blood sugar response than eating the same fruit as part of a meal. For joint inflammation management, the blood sugar moderation from contextual eating is as important as the fruit choice itself. Eat anti-inflammatory fruits consistently, rather than periodically. The polyphenol compounds in tart cherries, blueberries, and strawberries are water-soluble and cleared from the body within 24 to 48 hours of consumption. The benefit they provide is maintained only through consistent daily or near-daily intake. A large portion of blueberries once a week does not deliver the same sustained reduction in inflammatory cytokines as a modest daily cup. Consistency matters more than quantity. Eat at room temperature, not straight from refrigeration. Several of the anti-inflammatory enzymes in fruit, papain and to some extent bromelain, are partially deactivated by cold. Berry anthocyanins are more bioavailable from fruit that has been allowed to come to room temperature before eating. Taking fruit out of the refrigerator 30 minutes before eating is a small adjustment with a genuine effect on the bioavailability of its active compounds. Before this conversation closes, I want to address uric acid directly, because it is the single most important measurable variable connecting dietary fructose to joint pain, and it is one that a large proportion of older adults with joint pain have never had specifically tested or explained. Uric acid is the final breakdown product of purines, compounds found in certain foods and also produced during normal cellular metabolism. When serum uric acid rises above approximately 6.8 milligrams per deciliter, it exceeds its solubility in blood and begins to crystallize. In joint spaces, particularly in the cooler peripheral joints, toes, ankles, knees, wrists, fingers, urate crystals deposit in the synovial, tissue, and cartilage. These crystals are physically sharp. They trigger an intense inflammatory response from immune cells in the synovium. The result is joint pain that is sometimes attributed entirely to osteoarthritis or general aging, without the uric acid contribution being identified or addressed. Gout is the condition most associated with this process, and it is well recognized. What is less well recognized is that sub-gout uric acid elevation, levels above normal but below the dramatic threshold associated with acute gout attacks, contributes to chronic, lower-grade joint inflammation in a much larger population of older adults. Research has found that elevated uric acid, even without a formal gout diagnosis, is associated with accelerated cartilage breakdown and increased inflammatory markers in joint fluid. The summer relevance is direct. Dietary fructose is one of the most significant dietary drivers of uric acid elevation through the hepatic metabolism pathway described in Part 1. High fructose summer fruits, consumed generously across the warmer months, can meaningfully elevate uric acid in susceptible individuals over a period of weeks. If you have joint pain that has never been fully explained, ask your doctor to include serum uric acid in your next blood panel. It is a standard, inexpensive test. If your level is above 6 milligrams per deciliter, the dietary modifications in this conversation become genuinely important as part of your management, and the conversation with your physician about whether pharmaceutical uric acid management is appropriate becomes worth having. The dietary changes that most reliably reduce uric acid are increased hydration. Uric acid is excreted by the kidneys, and adequate water intake is the most direct means of supporting that excretion. Reduced fructose from all sources, regular consumption of tart cherry juice, adequate vitamin C from strawberries and other whole food sources, and moderate regular physical activity that supports renal uric acid clearance. The summer season brings an abundance that most people over 65 approach with uncomplicated pleasure, and that pleasure is right and worth preserving. The goal of this conversation has never been to reduce the enjoyment of summer fruit or to turn eating into a clinical calculation. It has been to give you a more accurate picture of the biochemical landscape so that the choices you make within that abundance are ones that work in your favor, rather than quietly against you. The joint pain that many older adults manage through summer, the morning stiffness, the afternoon ache, the resistance to movement that costs energy and independence, is not fixed and inevitable. It exists within a spectrum, and where on that spectrum you find yourself on any given day is influenced by what you ate that day, that week, that season. The fruits on the best list are available at every supermarket through the summer months. Tart cherries and blueberries are accessible frozen when fresh is unavailable. Avocado is a year-round staple. Strawberries are among the most affordable summer fruits in most countries. Papaya is widely available in most warm weather regions and in the international sections of most major supermarkets. You do not need to overhaul your entire diet. You need to make 2 or 3 substitutions in your fruit choices, eat the beneficial ones consistently rather than occasionally, and give them the context. A meal with protein and fat, room temperature serving, daily rather than weekly inclusion, that allows their active compounds to actually reach the joint tissue where they are needed. Your joints are not simply aging, they are responding every day to the environment you create for them. This summer, let the fruit bowl be part of the solution. I am Dr. Naira Stein. The choices available to you at the grocery store are more powerful than most people are ever told. That is the information gap I am here to close. Take good care of yourself. I will see you in the next one. Everything shared in this script is general educational information, grounded in published nutritional and clinical research. It is not a substitute for personal medical advice. If you are experiencing significant joint pain, swelling, or symptoms consistent with gout or inflammatory arthritis, please bring those concerns to your own physician. Dietary modifications support but do not replace appropriate medical evaluation and management of joint conditions.